Hey guys, welcome to Stefan Livera podcast, episode 9. And my guest today is Bryan. Thanks for coming on, Bryan.
Thanks, Stefan. You've had a lot of great guests so far, and I'm definitely happy to join and talk a little bit about Lightning.
Excellent. So I'll just quickly intro you for the listeners. Guys, Bryan Vu, he is the VP of Product at Lightning Labs. He previously worked at Google. He got into Bitcoin in the earlier days, around 2011. He joined Lightning Labs about 2 years ago. And just for a bit of background for anyone who's a bit newer, Lightning Labs is one of the 3 Lightning implementations. And Bryan, you've also got a very cool Twitter account, BVU, a 3-letter. So definitely Twitter OG.
Yeah, I was early on at Twitter, even though I actually don't use it very much.
Very nice. Perfect for when you launch your own ICO, BVU coin.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. So anyway, guys, I wanted to invite Bryan on and discuss some of the articles that he wrote on the Lightning Labs blog and just sketch out a vision of what Lightning Network could look like in future years. So we're going to try and pitch this discussion at people who know what Bitcoin is but aren't super in the detail on Lightning Network and try and help make that a little bit more real for everyone. So Bryan's articles, one of them that we'll start with is Lightning User Experience, a day in the life of Carol. So Bryan, maybe you want to discuss a little bit on that article in terms of onboarding.
Yeah, so in the article itself, we talk about the autopilot process, and that's essentially the very first thing a user will do when they open their Lightning wallet for the first time. They will use that process to move funds from their on-chain Bitcoin addresses into Lightning channels, from where they can conduct transactions much more quickly and cheaply. The other thing to note about autopilot is it's in a pretty early stage. So autopilot can have a variety of different heuristics that talk about or that look at a node's uptime, a node's success rate at routing payments, capital availability, et cetera. And currently, autopilot doesn't do as much as we expect it to in the relatively near term. But it's a very sort of nascent state of onboarding right now. But that's going to be improved pretty dramatically over the next several months.
Yeah, cool. So I guess this is sort of like as you're just starting with Lightning, and you might get this app, and the idea is obviously that we want the app to kind of do things in the background for the user, so they don't have to manually manage them. But if that does happen, are there any risks around autopilot doing sort of quote unquote bad channel management? Like, is there a risk that maybe it puts too much into a channel with the wrong or a dead node?
Yeah, there is definitely that risk, especially with the current version of autopilot. However, as we develop the routing network itself, I mean, one of the reasons why there is this significant potential for that to happen with the current implementation of autopilot is that we don't actually have routing nodes on the network at all yet. So, or at least we haven't written the routing node software, and so, or we haven't released it, let's say. Because of that, a lot of the heuristics that we plan to use for autopilot are not readily available to the apps. But as we build out the routing network, we've got a few engineers working hard on that currently. That autopilot experience will get a lot more reliable, a lot more, it should actually get quite a bit faster. Even since I wrote the post, we think we can get the initial onboarding time down to, 10 to 20 minutes max for initial first channel and first transactions. So I think that there is that potential. And then there is the case where autopilot would have to manage that as well. So in case, for example, one of your gateway routing nodes, I think we'll get into the discussion of all those distinctions later, but if one of your gateway routing nodes goes down for whatever reason, or they don't have enough capital to route your payment, and that happens consistently, autopilot will close that channel and open channels with other gateway nodes. But as the routing network evolves over time, and we have more information about which gateway nodes are reliable, the system itself should become very, very transparent and seamless to the user. Of course, like the whole concept is we don't want the user to even know that there is such a thing as autopilot. They should just know that they have some funds and their wallet is taking care of onboarding them to the Lightning Network, and they can just go buy whatever they want.
Oh, that's quite interesting, actually. So it won't necessarily say, "Oh, hey, Brian, you have 5 channels open and you have XYZ amount of Bitcoin in each one." Would it just show some? Is the idea that it would just show you a total?
Yes, yeah. So currently, our app, which is being written by a couple engineers, Tancred Hayes and Valentine Wallace, we're about to launch. We're in the process of launching an early version of that. It basically shows just the total balance, and our goal is really that that's all the user needs to know. They just need to know how much Bitcoin they have, and that they can send it immediately wherever they want to.
Yeah, that's really clever. Okay, I like that. And then, what are the key differences with the light client neutrino protocol to call out?
Yeah. So neutrino is essentially the way that we will be able to run Lightning nodes and Bitcoin nodes in general on mobile phones. It's a pretty significant improvement in terms of privacy and resource usage over the existing simplified payment verification that Satoshi came out with, and that Mike Hearn and Matt Corallo specified in BIP 37. It's the differences are a little bit technical, but essentially with BIP 37, you're giving a full node a list of addresses, and that full node is responding with information about transactions related to those addresses. With Neutrino, there's essentially a compressed list of transactions within each block, and that entire compressed list is sent to the mobile app, and the mobile app can decide which blocks it's interested in. So I don't know if it's totally clear from that explanation, but in the neutrino case, the full node has much less information about which transactions the mobile node is interested in.
Okay, yeah, cool. No, I think it's a fascinating, it's fascinating technology, and it's really just really cool to see the way this is all building out over time. And obviously, we're in early days. It's very sort of speculative, but I think there's some real potential to improve the way we use Bitcoin. Okay,
Yeah,
so then
yeah.
the next section that you go into is kind of hypothetically, if Carol were to then go to the mall and try and buy something using her Lightning smartphone app. And so, do you have any comments on how maybe the regular buying experience while you're out in a brick and mortar store might change or improve?
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be some pretty major improvements over existing on-chain transactions where you've got to wait for confirmations and that sort of thing. In the Lightning case, essentially you'll go to your store. The store will generate an invoice for you that will have the amount that you're being requested to pay and some details about the products you're buying. You'll scan that with your phone. You'll see the amount and the items that you're purchasing. You'll click confirm, and that's it. So I think that the near-term vision is that the experience will be something similar to using like my Starbucks app when I go buy coffee. There's basically a QR code scanning and a confirmation process. Eventually, we hope that we'll be able to make that into an NFC type thing. So it'll be like an Apple Pay. You'll just kind of tap and confirm. But it should be easier than putting a chip in the reader or other payment technologies.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. Okay. And then do you want to comment a little bit on the potential for routing failures? Now, I guess I'll say there was some recent discussion about this, and I know that there were some kind of safety precautions put in at the start of Lightning Network, like the amount that you can place in a channel and so on. But it's still, the conversation is worth having. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the things that maybe folks in the community in general don't quite know, and it's very early in terms of where we are with Lightning. But as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we actually have not released the routing node software. So the way that the routing nodes, the few routing nodes that there are connected is not necessarily in the most structured way at this point. What we expect is that routing nodes will be running a set of rules that tell them which other nodes are reliable to connect to, and they themselves will also understand which nodes they should be accepting connections from. They will also need to do things like managing fee rates. They'll need to do things like managing their capital ratio. So we're writing software that basically handles all those rules for them. There's a bunch of other things around like metrics and a few other things like that routing node operators will need, but that doesn't exist currently. So when people are routing payments in the network today, it's kind of haphazard, and it will be a lot better once we actually have routing node software out there. So I would say that we've kind of made a lot of progress on the the underlying protocol implementations. Obviously Lightning Labs, C Lightning from Blockstream, and Eclair from Async, but we have not yet built the software that runs on top of those protocol implementations, and that's the routing node software. And there's some client software out there. We're kind of early on in our own client software release process, but there are really those three parts. And without the routing node software itself, the routing network is not going to be nearly as reliable and as robust as it will eventually be. So that's one thing I was trying to get at with the following post about routing. But currently, there's all kinds of potential for routing failures, especially for larger payments. There's another concept called atomic multipath payments, which we can talk about a little more detail as well. It's maybe a little more on the technical side, but all these things should vastly improve the routing experience. But we basically haven't even really started trying to complete the routing solution at this point.
Cool. Okay. I suppose just while we're on that topic of routing, and though there are the three different implementations, would it be that each of the three teams would have their own routing node software, and it's kind of all interoperable, or what's the sort of plan with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that we actually have not talked that much about routing with the other teams, just because there is so much work and there has been so much work to be done on the base protocol implementation. I think that I'm not actually sure if the other teams are planning to build their own routing software, or obviously the routing software will be interoperable, and it doesn't know whether the end user or the merchant is using C Lightning or Eclair or LND. So our routing node software, of course, will work with any of the implementations. I think that as we move further along, I would like to have more in-depth conversations with the other implementations about our ideas for how we'll set up our routing rules. But that's it's still very early days on that.
Yeah, cool. No, I like that. Very interesting aspect of how this is all going to develop out. Okay, so I think the next area to discuss is around merchant benefits. So we're starting to see some more and more discussion around what the benefits of Lightning will be, even on the merchant side. So obviously the first step would just be it's even cheaper fees, right? So with Lightning, sometimes often the fee is even less than 1 cent. So that's really a really good result for the merchants. And also from his talk at Building on Bitcoin, July 2018, Sergey Kotliar, who is the CEO of Bitrefill, he made a few comments around how Lightning Network can help restart or give a fresh start to many of the pain points and problems that people experience trying to use Bitcoin layer 1 payments. Do you want to comment a little bit on that, on the benefits for merchants?
Yeah. And I watched Sergey's talk, and it was a great talk. I think there's a lot of good insights in that talk. I think one of the things that he touched on is that idea of how Lightning is invoice based rather than, I guess, Bitcoin's address based, where you just kind of send to a payment an address anonymously, or I guess without any kind of tracking. I think that's a big benefit for the merchants in that they know which payment is attached to which specific transaction, and so that they can handle things like refunds. They can handle things like making sure that there's not two payments from the same person, etc. So I think the invoice-based model is a big plus of Lightning, and a lot of Bitcoiners don't kind of realize that. They think, Lightning should work like Bitcoin addressing, but I actually think that is definitely a worse experience, especially for the merchants, than what we have with Lightning. I think that another thing, like you mentioned, the fees are going to be lower. Sergey also mentioned, the fees is not a major problem for him. And by the way, I'm really thankful to Sergey and Justin Camarena who work at BitRefill for being very forward thinking and way ahead of the ball. I talked with Sergey before our release, and they were just ready to go. They had everything integrated way ahead of time. But the other thing that I think, obviously, Bitcoiners probably know the fraud argument with, of course, Lightning being irrevocable, just as Bitcoin transactions are. You don't have the situation with chargebacks and having to manage disputes and that kind of thing. And I think another thing that will hopefully improve about the merchant experience is that currently I think I probably have 8 to 10 different credit cards, all the different credit cards I have to use for groceries versus gas, versus different department stores, and I have to manage all these different point systems. And then the merchants themselves, they have to game the system, the credit card system, by offering their own store credit cards. And every time I go to the store, they want to try to get me to sign up for their credit cards. And that's all that gaming is basically wasted effort. That's the result of the structure of the credit card fee system. So I think that, in an ideal world, if payments are very straightforward, very cheap, merchants can lower their prices a little bit, and we don't have to do all this kind of gaming stuff in order to maximize our payment returns, I guess.
Fantastic point, Brian. I really like that. I think that's something people have not really appreciated yet, that will come in with the impact of having really, really low fees and really reliable fees that don't require these sort of old world payment rails, if you will, and all the associated gaming that happens with that. Great points.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I think it also even provides additional privacy as well. So that's another great benefit for the merchants.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Okay, so how about the interaction between Lightning Network and the main chain? So in this example, you walk through how Carol might refill her Lightning wallet using an exchange. So could you sort of outline that process a little bit, and then just talk about if there's any examples of it?
Yeah. So we've worked with a few exchanges, and there's definitely a lot of interest from exchanges in integrating with Lightning. There's definitely engineering work going on internally at a few exchanges. And the essential concept is that if the exchange has Lightning channels and Carol or the end user has Lightning channels, there's really no on-chain transaction that needs to happen in order for me to move money from, let's say, my USD or Australian dollar balance into my Lightning wallet. That can happen essentially instantly. That if I have a BTC balance in my exchange, also I can transition that BTC balance directly to my Lightning wallet instantly as well. So once I've spent the money in my Lightning wallet, I will need to go refill it, and I can refill that using my my paycheck for my US dollars if I send that to an exchange, or if I have some BTC there, I can just refill that wallet immediately. So I think that process should be, when we get those exchange integrations done, that should be a very seamless process. We have a few different ideas around some stopgap ideas for how people can refill their channels without using an exchange because of all the kind of administrative overhead associated with exchanges. So you will be able to send money directly in and out from Bitcoin addresses to Lightning channels, but those are we basically want Lightning channels to be set up in such a way that you spend and then you refill, you spend and then you refill. You're not opening and closing, because that creates a lot more on-chain transaction traffic.
Right. Yeah, that's very clever. It's a more efficient use of Bitcoin's blockchain block space rather on layer one. Okay, clever. And another concept I was interested to ask about is, do you anticipate that employers would set up a Lightning channel to pay their employees, or would it kind of go through some other mechanism?
I guess there's really two ways to think about that, and I think it's a really good question because I am not sure how it's going to evolve. I would say that it probably makes a difference how much the employee makes. So if the employee is maybe like an hourly paid employee, or they're getting paid per day, or they make a relatively small amount of money, I can imagine an employer using Lightning. If they're making very large amounts of money, then they probably don't want to put all of their earnings into their Lightning wallet. So there might have to be a way for employers to split that money, or the employers might just pay in regular Bitcoin and leave it up to the employee to refill their Lightning channels. There could be exchanges and those kinds of things that can make all that happen without having to do a single on-chain transaction. So I think there are a few different possible models, and I think that is a really interesting question. I actually am not sure how that's going to evolve.
Yeah, no, just thought I'd try and help make it more real for people, so I guess it's almost like if you're a baller, you can take an on-chain payment, and if you're not a baller, well, you can do it all in Lightning channels. And I suppose the other thing you can do is maybe tell your employer to split your payments, to say, okay, pay me 20% or 30% of my wage in a Lightning channel, and pay me the rest on chain elsewhere, that kind of thing. So it's an interesting way it could evolve.
Yeah, a lot of that has to do with how the security for phones evolves, and there's a bunch of stuff with trusted execution environments, hardware wallets, etc. So it also depends on how much money people are willing to hold on their phones. So depending on how some of that key management technology evolves, people might be willing to hold very large amounts on their phone.
Yeah, good points. Okay, and then sort of related, I guess just more broadly about this post, do you have any thoughts on the future balance of on-chain layer 1 payments versus off-chain sort of payments? Is there any kind of equilibrium that will be met there?
I think there will be an equilibrium met there. Our CEO, Elizabeth Stark, talks about it being kind of like checking account versus savings account. So your savings you would keep on chain, and your day-to-day expenses, the amount that you need for your day-to-day expenses, would be off chain. And so I think where that equilibrium ends up going is yet to be determined. It's actually partially related to those security parameters we just talked about. But my ideal goal would be you could handle basically all of your day-to-day transaction stuff with Lightning, and then you would only need to use on-chain payments for funds that you were not going to touch for, let's say, 3 months or 6 months or a year even, or longer. But anything less than like a 3-month holding period, you would just hold within Lightning. That would be my ideal world.
Makes sense. Yeah. Okay, cool. And then later on in this post, you also touch on AMP. Did you want to tell the guys about what AMP is and how it might work?
Yeah. This is also related to our routing failure discussion a minute ago. I think that AMP, which stands for Atomic Multipath Payments, was proposed to the mailing list by one of our engineers, Connor Fromneck, a few months back. And essentially what it allows you to do is it allows you to split a very large payment into lots of small payments. So it's a little bit like on the internet, you want to send a large file to somebody, you split it up into lots of small packets, you route them all individually, and the receiver puts it all together at the end. With AMP, routing becomes more efficient, and you have fewer bottlenecks, etc. So AMP is definitely a big part of the routing story, and I think will also improve the reliability and speed of the network.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Hey, okay, cool. Let's now go over to the second post, which is exploring Lightning network routing. And so essentially in this post, you cover a lot of different kind of more technical topics. So let's set the context. What are the key important goals with routing?
Yeah, I think for routing, what I was trying to get across in the post is what we really want is for the user to not have to worry about routing at all. All they know is that they see a balance in their wallet, they see a product they want to buy, they press buy, it happens. In the background, there's a lot of different things that happen, and there's a lot of different goals that we have. One of which is we want to make it easy for anybody to join the routing network. So if you have a little bit of Bitcoin, you've got a spare computer around, you've got a little bit of you've got good bandwidth and can manage the uptime for that node, you should be able to start routing payments for other users. So we want to keep it easy to enter and exit the network. The other thing is that over time, all these routing nodes are essentially adhering to the rules that we talked about earlier, which are around the success ratio and node uptime, et cetera, capital availability. So over time, the nodes that are are more successful at routing, they will become better and better connected, and will be able to route more and more payments. They'll gain higher volumes, they'll earn more fees, and so they'll move up kind of within the network. And so I guess the key things are that we want the network to be decentralized, we want the network to be highly reliable, and we want it to be basically very simple for the end user. I should also mention that people, in the post I tried to address this as well, but there's been this whole concept of like, oh, there's going to be this one giant Lightning routing hub, and what I tried to explain in the post was that that's a very capital inefficient model. If there were only just one or a few very, very large hubs, and adding the multiple hops allows payments to be balanced out at multiple levels, improving the capital efficiency, lowering fees, and making the network more robust, more private in the process. So I think primarily speed. Oh, of course, low fees is another goal for routing. But the fees we expect to be very, very low because there are a relatively small number of machines that will need to be involved with each transaction, and each of those machines can route millions of payments with very modest hardware and power and bandwidth requirements. So as you mentioned, the fees should be very low. So we're not even really too worried about optimizing fees yet. Over time, I think the routing node operators will naturally do that.
Yeah, great points. Okay, so another point that you make is how, so you've got channel balances in Lightning, and I like how you've outlined that there are sort of natural inbound flows and outbound flows for the different types of users. So the end user, the consumer, say, the merchant, and exchanges. Could you maybe outline some of the typical cases for each scenario?
Yeah, I think so. At the very the most basic level, I have my own physical wallet full of US dollars, and I can go to the store and spend a bunch of those dollars, and eventually I will have to go to the ATM and refill my wallet. The same thing kind of happens with Lightning. So you'll create your channels, you'll spend your money. You won't be handing over physical cash, but you'll be scanning QR codes or tapping your phone. And over time, you'll need to then refill your balance, whether that's from an exchange for US dollars or whatever fiat you use, or you've got some BTC and cold storage that you want to refill your wallet with. So at the end user level, you're kind of having to balance there. Merchants also have to balance their books. So merchants, obviously, it's the reverse process where they actually need to create channels. Send the money out of those channels so that they can accept additional payments. And then their customers will, slowly fill up their channels. And then the merchant will have to send a transaction out to an exchange or to a supplier or to pay off employees to give themselves additional capacity. So essentially, merchants and users, at the end of the day, they sort of have to balance their books, just like they do in the existing financial system. Everybody's got to sort of balance their books, unless you can print money, which there are a few people who can do that. But exchanges are the same way. So exchanges, they have to, they take, they'll send money out to the Lightning channels of users, and they'll be receiving funds from merchants, and all those processes should, overall balance themselves out. And there's a bunch more detail about different ways that balancing process happens, but generally, the financial system has to be balanced overall.
Okay, cool. And then, so next down in the article, you talk about this concept of gateway routing nodes, and the idea is that these are those that serve the end users. Could you outline what these are, and then we'll go into further discussion on that?
Yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, that's part of one of those things that is not that widely known in the community, partly because we have a bunch more blog posts that I've been meaning to write. But gateway routing nodes are essentially kind of the front line of routing nodes that end user applications will connect to. So a gateway routing node is maybe a relatively new routing node. They don't have that much connectivity yet, and so they're accepting inbound channel requests from mobile phone users or PC users. and they're routing payments through the network for those end users. As a routing node, sort of over time, they gain a history of having high uptime, having high routing success, having enough capital on hand. They may decide to add more capital and potentially become a bridge node, which is kind of like a routing node for routing nodes. But the gateway routing node is kind of that first step that Autopilot is connecting to get the user's funds into the network initially.
Okay, got it. Okay, and then is the idea that these gateway routing nodes would be run as a business, or maybe they would just rather be run by a business with some kind of incentive to run a gateway routing node?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think there will likely be both. I think that a gateway routing node is really designed to be something that just enthusiasts will run. So, for example, I have my Bitcoin full node, and the kind of the overhead in terms of network costs and storage and et cetera should be very similar between running like a Bitcoin full node and a gateway routing node. Of course, you have to have a little bit of Bitcoin to put it in the network, but it shouldn't be heavily capital intensive. And so at the base level, those will be kind of most likely just individuals. As those individuals gain, as I said, that history of performing well as a routing node, they can potentially start to increase their volumes, increase their connectivity, increase their capital. And I imagine some of those folks might end up running sort of like small businesses and earning fees with those. But the network itself will be very highly competitive, just because it is relatively easy the barriers to entry are going to be very low. So even a very well connected node has other nodes that are going to be well connected around it, and if they're charging too much in fees, they won't make much. So I don't expect it's going to be a very big moneymaker. Not enough to build some sort of giant company, but I think potentially somebody who's very good at running routing nodes might be able to make a little bit of money on it. And so I do think that, as you mentioned, the people like merchants or exchanges, et cetera, will most likely run their own. Well, not most likely. They may they may decide to run their own nodes as well. But yeah, so I think there will be a combination of people who just they want to make sure they have reliable nodes to connect to. But the majority of at least the gateway level will probably be just individuals, just because I don't expect them to be very profitable.
Okay, got it. Okay, cool. Yeah, I think, as you said, it might be, let's say I'm a merchant and I want to make it easy for customers to pay me, so I'll run a routing node kind of scenario. Okay. And then, so the next section you talk about buffer capital and you talk about channel exhaustion. So could you maybe outline what channel exhaustion is, and then outline how routing nodes that don't have enough capital would get routed around?
Yeah. So channel exhaustion is what happens when you have, if you're, let's say, a gateway routing node, and you've got, let's say, 500 mobile phone users connected to your routing node, and they have all sent more money out than you have dedicated to the rest to connect to the rest of the network. Basically, it means that you have not put in enough money into your node to handle all of the users that you've accepted. And what should happen in that case is, in the short term, if my app realizes that one of my routing nodes is giving me failures for whatever reason, but let's say they've exhausted their capital, it will attempt to route through another gateway routing node. So by default, Autopilot connects to 5 gateway routing nodes. So if one of the 5 is down, it'll try another one of the 5. If that routing node does not increase its capital, or it stays offline for other reasons, my app will disconnect it. So my Autopilot will know this routing node has been unreliable for the past few hours. It will then go through the process of reallocating the funds to other gateway routing nodes. So it'll get routed around that way. And then further, the other routing nodes that are connected to that routing node will detect that routing node is generating a lot of failures, and so the other routing nodes will disconnect from that routing node as well. So eventually, that routing node, if they don't have enough capital in the system, and or they don't have connectivity, their power is down for whatever reason, they will eventually get taken out of the network. So so those are a few of the things that will happen in terms of those poorly behaving routing nodes getting routed around.
Got it. And I guess if I understand correctly, then it's if they run out of capital, then that node operator would just simply have to find a way to get replenished.
Yes. So there's two things. That node operator can, that's a good question. Yeah. So the node operator can either add capital, so they can open new channels, or add capacity through this process of splicing. So they can take their on-chain BTC and move it into the Lightning Network and contribute that to their capital, or they can refill those channels. So they can send money in from an exchange to refill those channels, or they can send that money in from, they might have another pool of capital somewhere else, or they can ask somebody for capital. Basically, somebody has to send capital into that channel.
Okay, cool. Okay, and then further on down, you mentioned this concept of bridge nodes, and I think there's a relation there between the bridge nodes and the routing nodes. But can you outline what a bridge node is, and maybe what is the key distinction between that and other routing nodes?
Yeah, so really in the post, there's really only two kinds of routing nodes. There might be more eventually, but currently, I foresee there just being gateway routing nodes, which are those routing nodes that accept connections from anonymous users. So basically mobile phone users, PC users, basically end users. Those gateway routing nodes are also accepting what we call non-advertised channels, which means that those channels that are connected to the mobile phones are not available for routing. So this is one of the other things that is very different, I think, in the current network than how the network will work in the future, which is that most of the channels will not be visible in the routing graph. But to get back to your question, the bridge nodes are those nodes that don't or that are connected, that are connecting different routing nodes to each other, and that are not connecting mobile phones directly, or basically end users directly. So they're more like the interior routing nodes that help facilitate the hops between routing nodes. And so over time, if you're a gateway routing node, if you perform well as a gateway routing node, other nodes will attempt to connect to you, and more of your routing will consist of payments between routing nodes or hops between routing nodes, rather than those sort of first hops from end users or merchants, if that makes sense.
Yeah, got it. No, I like that. It's a good explanation. Okay, cool. And then I think the other question I had was, out of what we've explained so far today in terms of the routing and the end user consumer experience, are there any key differences in the vision of Lightning Labs versus the others, so Blockstream's C Lightning and Async?
That's a good question. And actually, I think that there are slight differences, I would say. A lot of differences are very technical in terms of the programming languages used. Async, I think they've moved a little bit further ahead with regard to the mobile phone apps and the merchant side of things. Blockstream, I think they've focused a lot on tight integration with Bitcoin Core, and those it's built in C. We haven't really, because at least in my the things that I'm exposed to are very sort of low level protocol details with those guys. Major I would guess business differences other than that in terms of like long-term vision haven't really emerged. So I guess I couldn't really explain their long-term vision, and they probably couldn't explain ours either. So
Sure.
We've been very focused on the protocol implementations itself, which I think is the hard part, and I think we're pretty much through with that initial phase. Of course, we'll still be iterating on it, but we've worked really closely with them. It's been a great collaboration, and I definitely am very interested to see what their visions are. We're kind of interested to see what our own vision is. We have some pretty good ideas, but I actually don't know how ours compares to theirs.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Actually, out of interest, what's the sort of process for collaboration? Do you guys sort of meet up once a year, or just do kind of regular calls, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we have a regular call every 2 weeks. It's hosted by Rusty Russell of Blockstream, but Lalu Osuntoken, our CTO, is a major player in there, and Fabrice from Async is represents Async and Eclair. And so we have the biweekly call. We have, of course, the mailing list. Anybody's welcome to submit any ideas to the mailing list. And we've met with those folks informally every now and then, and we do try to have in-person meetings as well. So I think it's a very collaborative process, and we definitely try to get together when we can.
Okay, cool. All right, and a few more, I guess, general questions. Maybe you just want to tell the guys a little bit about what watchtowers are and what the plan for development with those is.
Yeah. That's a good question. It's a bit of a technical question, but definitely for those folks who have been paying attention to Lightning and our development, it's an important one. In Lightning, there is a potential for nodes to behave badly and to attempt to steal money from the end users or merchants who are connected to them. The way that Lightning works is there's what we call a breach remedy transaction or a revocation transaction that can be broadcast in the case that your counterparty is trying to cheat you, essentially. The problem with that, of course, is you may not be online all the time. So the default is 7 days, I believe, at least in L&D. So if you happen to be offline for 7 days in a row, you might not notice that your counterparty is trying to cheat you. So in that case, what we call a watchtower will broadcast the revocation or remedy transaction for you, and your money will be recovered, and the channel will be closed. So that's essentially what the watchtowers are for. If we have a world, I think that in my ideal world, that should happen relatively infrequently. People are online pretty consistently these days, and I think that the game theory around trying to steal money, the game theory around at least like a routing node trying to steal a bunch of money from those who are connected to it, I think is pretty strongly against an attempt of this nature. But we'll definitely see how it goes, and watchtowers may be more or less important depending on how often people come online and offline, and how often these sort of breach attempts happen. I think I'm only aware of a few that have happened so far since we released our mainnet beta in March, but that's essentially watchtowers are there to protect us from that circumstance.
Yeah. And so is the concept then that an individual might run their own watchtower back at home, or maybe these routing nodes might implement a watchtower service, or how would that, do you have any ideas on how that would work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like you've been following our GitHub repo. So Connor Fromneck is currently implementing that private watchtower functionality. So that's going to be kind of the initial iteration of watchtowers, where let's say merchant or routing nodes can run their own watchtower on a different machine, or an end user can run their own watchtower. Over time, we're potentially going to have a system where there will be a discovery of watchtowers, so you can pick another person to run a watchtower for you, or there could be services that run watchtowers. But the first iteration is exactly what you talked about, which is kind of businesses or individuals running their own watchtowers.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I was just basically speculating. Thought it'd be good to understand how that works.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
You and Connor on the same page there.
Yeah. Okay. And then the next question I had was around. Now, maybe this is a bit more technical, but could you explain for the guys what splicing is?
Yeah. So splicing, I actually mentioned it, so that's a good conversation point, because I think I mentioned it without really explaining what it is. But it's the process of essentially resizing a Lightning channel. So let's say I join the network with $500, and Autopilot opens 5 $100 channels for me. I later decide that I want to add another $500. So I'll have a total of $1,000 of capacity in the network. I can splice into those existing channels. So I can make 5 $200 channels, or I can add 5 more $100 channels. So then I would have 10 $100 channels. The one thing to know is that splicing is something that should really be handled behind the scenes, and mostly I think will be cared about by routing node operators. I don't think that end users should really have to worry about splicing. Autopilot should take care of this whenever it's necessary for them. So if they have a particularly small channel, then splicing would be probably would make more sense. If they already have very large channels, like let's say $100 channels, then it's probably better to increase the channel diversity and connect to other gateway routing nodes. So there's going to be kind of a decision that gets made about whether to splice or whether to open new channels. But I think that should all be automated.
Got it. Okay. And I guess just technically, what's happening under the hood when you splice? Is it an on-chain transaction to do that, or how does that work?
Yeah. So that's a good question, and I'm actually not the most knowledgeable about that, but it is an on-chain transaction. So it is an on-chain transaction to convert one funding transaction to a different funding transaction. One thing to note about that is you can splice many channels at a time. So in the example I just gave, let's say you wanted to splice up 5 different channels and add to them. That's only a single transaction to splice them all at once. So you can splice many channels at the same time. Or let's say I want to reduce my capacity. Let's say I need some funds. I've got $1,000 in the network and I need to take $500 out, and it needs to be on chain for I need to pay somebody on chain. That can be a single splice transaction as well. So those are those are on chain transactions.
Okay, cool. No, thank you. That makes sense. What about backups? So let's say Carol, she set up her Lightning wallet, on her smartphone app, but then she loses her phone breaks or she loses the phone. Do we have any ideas on how backups could work for them?
Yeah, great questions. One of the things that we've been working on, our CTO, Lalu, that I mentioned earlier, is a new seed format. It's called AEZed, but it allows us to essentially have a similar backup concept to how regular Bitcoin wallets are backed up. So I think there's 24 words by default, and there's different derivations for the different types of transactions within Lightning. So at the first level, you will want to have that seed that allows you to basically recover in the case of you lose your phone or something. There's also a concept of backups for each channel. So each time you open a new channel, you'll have to sort of refresh your backup, and that is something that potentially Watchtowers could also do. So there are a couple different levels of backup that allow you to, and if you have that per channel backup, if you lose your phone, you can close all of your channels. If you only have the original seed, you then have to ask your counterparties to close the channels for you. So there's a few different layers of backup, and Connor is definitely much more expert on that than I am. But the general concept should be should be very similar to backing up your regular Bitcoin wallet.
Okay, no, great. The next question I had was just around Lightning Network reference rate. So this concept of time value of BTC, interest rates in Lightning Network. Do you have any comments on that, Bryan?
Yeah, that's a great question. I did listen to your conversation with Nick, and obviously he knows a lot more about finance and interest rates than I do. But for me, the concept that I've always had in mind in terms of the fee rates for Lightning is that those fees for routing payments should get pushed down to basically the break-even point for the nodes to operate their hardware, operate their software, as well as the risk to their capital in case of like sort of a security breach. So so I expect that those fee rates should get pushed down quite a lot. And I don't imagine that, at least in my mind, I've never imagined that there would be a premium above those two those two costs for the routing node operators. I think that ideally over time, also the security of the nodes will get better, and there will be less of a need to worry about calculating for that risk of theft. But I'm not the reference rate concept did not entirely resonate with me, just because I just don't imagine that there would be a kind of a persistent interest rate type premium. But I also have to admit that I may not completely understand the concept. So the other thing that I thought of when I was listening to the episode was that different routing nodes, based on their varying level of time that they've been routing and their different history, et cetera, will have different fee rates and different volumes. And so there also wouldn't necessarily be sort of like a globally known rate, which I think you guys talked about a little bit as well. So I feel like there are some reasons why I don't think something like the reference rate will necessarily emerge, but it's certainly a very, very interesting concept. And if it does happen, I definitely love to do a little more thinking about it.
Excellent. Yeah, no, thank you. I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and I think I did actually ask that question of what if we aren't able to come up with a standardized rate, or everyone just has different rates and we can't really standardize on something. But it's a nascent space. We might see further developments come. I think the other question I wanted to ask you was, and I guess obviously a lot of us Bitcoiners who believe in this think it's going to go really, really big. And if you think Bitcoin, the price is going to go huge, you kind of naturally don't want to spend a lot of it yet. And in a sense, you're using it more like a store of value, at least in these earlier stages. Did you have any comments around Lightning Network contributing on that?
Yeah, I think the store of value use case is I agree with most of your previous guests. Very illustrious, economically literate folks. I think that it is, Bitcoin has to become a store of value first before it does become a medium of exchange. But I think that something like Lightning can also accelerate that process of the store of value becoming stable. So I think that a couple of things that I think Lightning can improve upon in terms of Bitcoin is from a decentralization standpoint. I think if we lived in a world where there wasn't something like Lightning, and you had to use centralized services, or you had to transition your funds from fiat for your day-to-day business, and then you were only able to use and you only use Bitcoin basically for hodling, I think that there would be, I guess, points of failure in terms of whichever 5 or 6 exchanges are available in your country. I also think that there's a loss of privacy with that, and with that loss of privacy, there would also be potentially loss of fungibility. So I think that, and also there's just a lot of inconvenience in terms of having to do all kinds of KYC AML. Like I've had to take pictures of myself, holding up different signs, and it's very hard to get approved for various exchanges. So I think that just from a pure store value standpoint, the fungibility and security aspects of Lightning can be very, very helpful. It's just making Bitcoin much more liquid, and making it so that you can spend your Bitcoin everywhere. Lalu always talks about the Matrix meme, which is when Bitcoin's $1 million, you won't have to sell it. I think that's very much my hope as well. So I think Lightning is a big part of that.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, so I think if I had to summarize, it's basically that Lightning will still help reduce the single points of failure kind of concept. It will also improve the fungibility, and it does add some level of privacy to the end user as well. So All great points. I think it's a really honestly just such a fascinating space to follow. So thanks a lot for coming on today, Bryan. It's been a fantastic and really interesting conversation with you. Did you have any final comments you wanted to make, Bryan?
Let's see. Yeah, thanks, Stefan. It's been a great conversation, and definitely very impressed with your level of research and knowledge of Lightning. I think we have not done as good of a job as I would like in terms of blog posting and putting some of this documentation out there. So it's nice to be able to get some of this information out in a relatively low impact way on your podcast. Let's see. I think I would just say that if people are looking at the Lightning Network now and expecting that that's how it's going to be, let's say 3 to 6 months from now, I would say that Lightning is going to change a huge amount when we introduce this concept of routing nodes and when we have non-advertised channels. So I think Lightning is going to get a lot better, a lot more reliable, a lot simpler. As I said, the apps that Tanks and Val are working on. So we kind of have to get those three things all in there. We've done the hardest part, which is the protocol implementation. But when we get the routing rules stuff out there and the client apps out there, I think Lightning will be kind of fully operational at that point. So I feel like some people think that Lightning is fully operational now, and I think that we have a ways to go, but we're making really, really good progress. And last year at this time, Segwit wasn't even activated yet, or maybe it was just activating. I can't remember the exact dates. And we didn't even know if Lightning was going to even be technically possible until, this year. So we're really happy with where things are at. And, I think the community, it was faster. We get a lot of, complaints about how long Lightning is taking, but this kind of stuff takes a while. And security and privacy, decentralization are super, super, super important to us. And, we're all longtime Bitcoiners. Like yourself, and we have a lot of the same kinds of ideas as you do and your guests. So we want to do things right.
Excellent. No, thanks very much, guys. So guys, you can find Bryan on Twitter. His handle is @BVU. And also, obviously, guys, go and check out the Lightning Labs website. You can see their GitHub. And obviously, I'll put the links in the description in the show page for the routing blog post and the Lightning UX post. Is there anywhere else that you would like to direct people to, Bryan?
No, I guess those are probably the best places to reach me, though. As I said, I don't use Twitter that often, but I think my email address is on the website as well.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thanks very much, Bryan, and chat soon.
Great. Thanks, Stefan.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Thanks for that, Bryan. And so, guys, I will put the notes for this episode on my blog, stefanlivera.com. Look up SLP9. Just a quick reminder, please subscribe to the podcast so you get all the new episodes as they come out. Share it with your friends. Share it on social media. Any feedback, come back and find me on Twitter @StefanLivera. Thanks, and that's all from us.